Yeah, so this is the talk. If you get the Eminem reference, then you are also of a certain generation, maybe. I realized that this morning when I was thinking about the title. But what I'd actually like for us to think about today is what are the things that make up our modern world? Who built Berlin's sewage system that's beneath our feet? What are the train tracks that we rode and the trains that we rode to get here? The electricity grid that powers everything, and even the roads that we walk across. In the end, it's actually the government, or rather we as citizens and residents with our taxes. And when we ask ourselves, however, about these same questions about open source software, about the foundational components that underpin our world's digital infrastructure, it's very, very different. It's Daniel for curl, Piotr, Christian, and Volkan for log4j, a small team that's revitalizing the Fortran language, Sarah for nominatims, which is a geocoding project, Richard at Yocto, and countless other maintainers. And so in an arena that is so dependent on individual people, often working alone and unpaid, we have to think about who will take on these responsibilities in the future. So I like to start with an analogy. So I want to take a little bit of a closer look at the history of public infrastructure generally and make some comparisons to help direct our thinking. Who here took a shower this morning or last night? Do you want to raise your hand? Thank you all. We really appreciate it. And I consider it one of the marvels, the greatest marvels of modernity, that I can turn on a faucet and water comes out that I can drink, cook, shower with. But it wasn't always this way. And it actually took many, many people and a lot of money to get to where we were, or to where we are today. If you were in Berlin on New Year's Eve, or actually just a month ago on April 29th, you would have experienced that several districts were without water. And some streets in the district of Wedding and Friedrichshain were flooding. And that's because a 100-year-old gray cast iron pipe broke. On New Year's Eve, some people thought maybe it was because of fireworks. If you've ever been in Berlin for New Year's Eve, there's a lot of fireworks. But in the end, they confirmed it was only wear and tear. And it's not only entropy that eats away at infrastructure, both physical and digital. Let's think about this question. How do we build and maintain something that lasts for 100 years, like this gray cast iron pipe? So how did this system get started? I really like to look at London, mostly because they have very beautiful sewer systems, if you look at this. So how did they build it? In the 1800s, their population was growing. They got to about 2.5 million people in the London area. There was an ad hoc system of wells, water pumps, cesspits, over 200,000 cesspits, if you know. That's just like a hole in the ground where you put your gross stuff, and what they called latrine bucket carriers who removed night soil from your home. So as you can imagine, as population was growing, the whole system was really reaching its limits. And I literally mean it was overflowing. So as richer people, wealthy and middle-class folks started having indoor plumbing, so toilets, that led to all this waste being flushed directly into the waterways and rivers, like into the Thames, which then led to cholera epidemics and tens of thousands of people dying in the 1830s and 40s and 50s. Lots and lots of people making plans. But what it took actually was the Great Stink, which was in 1858, where it was so hot that instead of the sewage going out to sea, it stayed in the river and actually like right in front of Parliament. So then the people were like, oh, this is not good. And so they authorized a lot of money, which the civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette led a project, and they finished the sewage system for London in 1875 at a cost of £6.5 million, which doesn't seem like a lot now, but I'm sure it was a lot back then. Same thing happened in Berlin. Around the same time, Berlin was at 500,000, excuse me. One of the last capitals actually to construct a water supply system. And the person who did it is James Hobrecht. And then later, an English company led by Charles Fox and Thomas Russell Crampton. And it's really interesting to think about how international things were even then, because both the water system and the gas works were built by English companies in Berlin. So it's always been, very complicated international connections. It's nothing that every country does on its own. And so the good news is, since then, various government-owned companies have been in charge of Berlin's water and sewage infrastructure, and now they provide almost 4 million residents with clean water and flushing toilets. So if you know anything about software, people in this world, everybody's talking about software eating the world. And even if you think about open source, which is a type of software, is eating software itself generally even faster. And in the 19th century, the culprit was toilets. As talked about, people are flushing them. They were literally putting pressure on a system that was not designed for flushing toilets. So just a few other examples that I wanted to show of other kinds of public infrastructure, because we like to talk about roads and bridges, but there's also railways, schools, libraries, highways, and all those things cost a lot of money, but we did them. You know, as a society, we decided we want to have schools, we want to have trains, we want to have libraries. And it all cost, for example, I found out that the US highway system cost about $114 billion at its time. And that in 2023 dollars would be $618 billion. So not a small investment. And just to look about who is responsible, this is really where I wanted to go, the whole point of the analogy, who is responsible for public infrastructure. In Berlin, there's Berliner Wasserbetriebe, there's the Stromnetz, there's the BVG and the S-Bahn for public transit, but we also have multiple train companies with Deutsche Bahn Regio, Infrago, you have the Autobahn AG, and actually, if we talk about social infrastructure, you also have the Senatsverwaltung für Bildung that takes care of schools, and I could, of course, not forget BSR for trash, and VÖBB for the library system. But to compare it to digital infrastructure, we have lots of names of individual people. So when we ask ourselves about open source software, about these foundational components that are really critical for digital infrastructure, it's very different. So this is a little overly simplified, just so it will fit on a slide, to be honest. There's lots of teams behind all of these, but there's also often one person or a small set of people who are what we call maintainers, the people who are most in charge or making the main decisions about these digital infrastructure projects. And these are just also not, of course, a comprehensive list, but just a few of the projects and the components that I've run into while working at Germany's Sovereign Tech Agency. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you all about this is because digital infrastructure is really fragile. So it is everywhere. It's in 96% of code bases. It contributes a lot to the economy, but in the EU specifically, but also around the world. But there's a lot of public investment that is lacking. So many of the audited code bases that people are looking at contain high risk or critical vulnerabilities, and then 90% of components are more than 4 years out of date. So it's really kind of, if you've seen this comic, which I have to contractually put in every single presentation that I ever give, there's just sometimes one person down there holding everything up. And with this increased pressure on this whole ecosystem, from digitalization, which we've been talking about a lot today, and the use of software everywhere, and if we think about the toilet analogy, whether it's machine learning or every company and every conference, like Republica, needing their own app, this is all weight on top of these blocks, and it's all pushing down, or trickling down, actually. It's gushing. All this stuff is gushing onto the individual maintainers. And these maintainers are getting old, or getting older. In the nearly 50 years of free software, people have run, studied, modified, and shared their code, creating lots of open technologies that form the backbone of our open society, or of our modern society. So if we think of these digital roads and bridges, they are everything from cars to mobile phones to thermostats, and they could all not function without open source. And many of the people maintaining this technology are volunteers. They actually just solved a problem, and they shared the solution with the world, but the world has come to rely on their labor. And so I was asking myself, and we are asking ourselves, what will happen when they stop, when they retire? And this is just from the Tidelift maintainer, State of the Open Source Maintainer survey that they did last year. And you can sort of see, it's not super clear, but the age, the bell curve is shifting to the right. People are getting older, and it's a little bit scary. And we've done our own research on this. So the left graph is, again, from Tidelift. The right is from a survey that we at the Sovereign Tech Agency did, that we conducted of open source maintainers in the spring of 2024. We didn't think about the data comparisons when we did this, so the age brackets are a little bit different. But if you compare, so for example, the folks who are 12 or more years of experience, they account for 67% of the people that we surveyed. So if you imagine, that's usually somebody in their 30s, maybe 40s, depending on when they started doing open source. And that leads us to the question of succession. So we have two related problems. There's, in one, the cracks in the system that keeps digital infrastructure working are widening, to paraphrase Nadia Ekbal in Roads and Bridges, a great book if you want to read about this. And in the other, you see those people standing on this bridge in Dresden, I think, that collapsed a few months ago. And if you just think that those people actually really want to retire, that they want to pass the baton on to someone else, or the torch, or whatever metaphor you want to use, but they're not sure they can find someone. And so what I want to share with you today is to think that governments are generally, I mean not in this case, but quite good at maintenance. And it's something that we take for granted. I think Deb Chakra says in their book, infrastructure is stuff that you take for granted until something goes wrong. So it's whether it's making sure that medicines are safe, that water is clean, that the electricity grid is in balance, or that bridges are in repair. We generally, and I use that word very carefully, can rely on public agencies and institutions to be on the ball, whether it's here in Germany, where I live, or in the US, where I grew up. And so for digital infrastructure, for the open technologies that are used in everything from space probes to smartphones, we're really leaning very hard on the work of individuals or small groups of volunteers that I shared with you all before. So, passing the digital baton. I know I painted sort of a gloomy picture, like what is going on, who's going to do it, is all of society going to collapse? It's really not all doom and gloom. I talked to a few people, friends and contacts, and they actually gave me some interesting examples of the community around the Linux kernel, for example, has a lot of new contributors, and the people are fairly young, and it's not all bad. So that's one place that it's going pretty well. Also in the PHP programming language, we contracted at the Sovereign Tech Agency with a group of people to make some foundational improvements and maintenance, and also the folks there are, as I was told, fairly young. So it's not bad. It's not terrible. But I think my call to you all today is to say we have to do more than just hope and pray that there's single good stories or good anecdotes from particular communities. So what do we need to do? We need to invest in people, pay them money, create opportunities for them to enter these open source communities, and then also welcome new contributors so that there's always a chance for new people to enter these communities and to do the work that we all rely on. And so, one thing why I wanted to highlight people who are doing this really well. There's 3 programs I'll talk about a little bit: Outreachy, the Linux Foundation Mentorship Program, and Google A Summer of Code. Outreachy provides internships to people from all backgrounds who face discrimination, systemic bias, or underrepresentation in the technical industry. They do 3-month internships that are both paid and remote. The Linux Foundation Mentorship Program is really large, it seems, a little bit complicated to get a grasp of it. They also offer internships in open source, last for 12 weeks, and some of the projects offer stipends. So they're also trying to connect mentors and mentees to increase diversity and inclusion in these open source communities. And the Google Summer of Code, I think, is really like a huge program which also offers mentorship in open source projects. It starts at 12 weeks, it's extendable, it's specifically targeted at beginners. And I just found out that over 12,000 people were selected in 2025 for this Summer of Code. And they also pay a small stipend based on the project size that is proposed, and it's also remote. So those are just a few options. I think Outreachy actually is in some money difficulties because of the cutbacks in a lot of these kinds of tech companies that were originally funding the internships. So if you know of anybody with money around, I think point them at Outreachy. It's a really good program. Not that the other ones aren't, but in specific, I've heard really good things about Outreachy. So just to sort of round this out, talking about digital public infrastructure, governments are in charge of education, clean water, transportation, sewers, as I have spoken about. They too can also invest in digital infrastructure and make sure that there's succession plans in place, that digital infrastructure and critical open source is maintained in the public interest. And I'd like to make the analogy that just as countries made the transition from toll roads to public roads, from private schools to public schools, it's also possible for governments and nation states and other organizations to secure the public digital commons without running roughshod over this enormous, sprawling, organic ecosystem of free and open source software, the contributors and the communities who have created it. So I think it's possible. We'll see. And one last word, because I feel like I always have to say, how do we do this? The ways that you build a sewer system or that you keep air travel safe are not the same as how you commission software maintenance, especially not when you're talking about a web of critical open source infrastructure where there are thousands of individual maintainers, there's hobbyists, there's semi-professional people, and actually also professional contributors. So it's pretty messy. How do you identify the people with the knowledge and the experience to keep this work going? How do you plan for succession in these communities to keep this work going? And if we want to stretch metaphors, which I really enjoy doing, we have to imagine that it's like trying to wrap string around these individual strands of the spider web in order to support it. And then what we at the Sovereign Tech Agency are always very conscious of, there's the question of what attention and public money do to these technologies and communities. So we are very aware that putting investment into these ecosystems can also have unintended consequences, and we're always experimenting and trying to make sure that we're very cognizant of the different factors and effects that may have. So, I guess I am ready for questions. If you would like to get in touch with me, here's a few ways. And thank you for all being here and listening.